Whenever a beloved game comes out, after the chip dust settles, gamers always love to speculate about what comes next. And it was no different when Tetris was released back in 1988. The only issue was there wasn't a lot of story here that you could use to predict what might come next. But fans with a keen eye noticed something, a very well-hidden Easter egg that would fly over the heads of the young children who played this on the Game Boy. This game had words in it. And with that, the groundwork was laid for Wordtris. Now, 1991 was a chaotic year in the old Soviet Union where Tetris had been developed, and by that I mean that crap was collapsing. With so much instability in the country, releasing a video game was no certain thing. It would take a true statesman to navigate the crisis and make sure both the East and the West could enjoy such an important title. So they brought in Armen Sarkisian, the future president of Armenia and personal friend of the King of England, to develop the game. Like, no, that's actually real. The president of Armenia made Wordtris. The president himself detailed his prior experiences in The Hollywood Reporter, which I've included the link to in the description because the story is quite interesting. In the article, he says, and I quote, "It was at the Computer Center at the Academy of Sciences of the Soviet Union, the prestigious scientific institution where Pajitnov, the co-creator of Tetris, worked, that I co-invented Wordtris. The game launched just before the 1990s and later sold to consumers as the follow-up to Tetris. Born roughly at the same time as Tetris, Wordtris emerged out of a project I spearheaded in the early 1980s to invent a fax machine capable of translating information from one language into another during transmission. I was a young professor of theoretical physics at Yerevan State University, where I had founded the Department of Mathematical Modeling of Complex Systems. My partners, Sergei Utkin and Vyacheslav Tsoy, were scientists based in Moscow. We used the applications developed for the fax machine on an educational game in which the player would have to make words from letters raining from above. After displaying our creation to friends, we forgot all about it and got on with our lives. Sergei and Vyacheslav carried on doing fascinating work in Moscow, and I, trained as a mathematician and theoretical physicist, traveled to do research at Cambridge University. While I was away, Moscow was agog with rumors that American entrepreneurs were sniffing around the Soviet Union for video games. Rather than being clandestine, their trips were facilitated by Elektronorg Technika, or ELORG, the foreign trading company run by Soviet spy agency the KGB. But the tales of fabulous wealth passing hands we heard were not reflected in Pajitnov's way of life. What should have rightly been his was pocketed by the Soviet state, which had a monopoly on the copyright. As far as we knew, he wasn't given a single cent. Pajitnov later fled the Soviet Union for a better life that was his due. If what had transpired taught us that there was a vast market for video games beyond the frontiers of the Soviet Union, the unjustness of it all made us resolve that we would not let the Soviet regime do to us what it had done to our colleague. He then goes on to tell the tale of an American businessman sneaking into the USSR as a tourist to evade the KGB, signing a deal with him, and then releasing the game as a Tetris follow-up. He mentions how his kids got to play a prototype from Nintendo when Steve Jobs asked him to make a Mac version. After the fall of the USSR and Armenian independence, he decided to step away from gaming into politics, first becoming an ambassador to London, then NATO, then the Benelux, and then the Vatican. In 1992, he became Prime Minister of Armenia, and then later President in 2018. And that is the story of Wordtris and the President of Armenia. So now that we know the lore of its development, what actually is this game? Well, it's kind of like a mashup of Tetris and Bookworm. Now, when you get to be my age, you start to know a lot of words, so you'd think this would be the perfect kind of game for a gamer of my caliber. Or at least that's what I thought, because I actually bought Wordtris at the same time I bought my original Super Nintendo 4 years ago. This was actually my first experience with the system. So how was that experience? Well, let's start from the top. This is a traditional 2D falling block puzzle game. Now, these sorts of games typically don't wow you with the graphics, so when it comes to presentation and vibe, these really ride or die by the music. OG Tetris had this bop. Dr. Mario had a song called Fever because it's so hot. Panel de Pon makes me forget the troubles of this life. But Wordtris's music just sounds sad and creepy. I mean, listen to this. I call this song Death at the Circus. And this one is Waltz of the Gulag. I give to you Rugrats in Chernobyl. Here we have a personal favorite of mine, Execution of a Poor Beggar. Then they go and throw in a random bop, just proving they could have had good songs, but chose not to. Speaking of choices, let's talk choice in backgrounds. What the heck is this? I unironically find this game more unnerving than most horror games. Something about the music combined with these images awakens something ancient in my brain. Like, I'm afraid of this stuff in like an animal kind of way. Like, why is this guy being eaten by a lion? Why is this woman absolutely chugging alcohol in a word game for children? Well, I guess if I lived in this world, I'd also need to cope. Not that this is a healthy way of doing it by any means, but at least I understand. Actually looking at this more while writing, that's not alcohol. I think it's actually something on fire, thus fitting with the circus theme. But still, I mean, come on. Imagine if you had a dream that looked and sounded like this. Would you not describe it as a nightmare? When I turned this game on, my toddler listened to the music and looked at the TV for about 15 seconds and started screaming at me to turn it off. And I gotta say, it's hard to disagree with that assessment. But what about the gameplay? Does the gameplay save Wordtris? On the SNES version, sadly no. There's a few problems here, but chiefly it gets way too dang fast, way too quick. How in the world am I supposed to think about words in this short of a timing window? My neurons do not fire this fast after a long day of Microsoft Excel. Please slow it down. I already can't think straight with him looking at me. The other problem lies with phonics and the English alphabet in general, mainly that all words need these things called vowels, and they are way too scarce here. You basically just stack up a bunch of random letters until A or E show up to save the day, because you don't really have time to strategize, and it just kinda kills the balancing. I mean, if you slowed it down and maybe increased vowel spawn rates, you'd have something here. But words are more complex than just filling in straight lines with shapes. And the way this plays out on the Super Nintendo version makes the game feel like it's built less around strategy and careful planning, and more around RNG and shoving as many vowels in the middle of the screen as possible. And I'm not sure that was the original vision for this. Also in 2-player, which doesn't include a head-to-head mode sadly, there's a heavy lag when you make a word. You can really feel the Soviet workers on the other end of my Super Nintendo desperately try to decipher if the things that I made were indeed words, and it can really mess up your concentration and timing. And it makes me sad to say all this because I actually really like word games of this nature. I played a lot of the Webkins game with the beavers and the words. I even got the trophy. And I mean, I also like Bookworm. And my wife and I even liked that game from LinkedIn a few videos ago. So I like the genre and I like Tetris, but combining them like this just doesn't work. I hope governing Armenia went better for the devs than this did. And I'm willing to bet it did because I looked at a playthrough of the DOS version and the tile speed is way slower, to the point you can actually have time to spell. This looks fun and I feel like it's what Nintendo forgot, that I actually like to play the games I buy. Few comprehend this. So if you'd like to play Wordtris, it looks like this version addresses all my main issues with the game, so go nuts. I don't really have a PC you can emulate it though. But at that, I'd like to thank you for watching Hydrated Gaming. Have a nice day, and stay hydrated.